All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the first session. I'm excited to introduce our next presenter, Brother Katie Magoon, for our session, Unconscious Bias, Rethinking the Way We Think as Leaders. Just a quick intro on Katie. Katie was a member of our National Professional Development Committee this past biennium and was a huge support for us there. But Katie's also served as in many different capacities as professional development chair, leadership foundation chair, many other volunteer roles that have been critical to the organization. Professionally, Katie is founder and president of People Solutions Center with 20 years of experience in human resources and recruiting in Fortune 100 and nonprofit organizations. Her prior roles range from providing training and consulting in the HR field, also to recruiting director for a high volume recruiting organization. We're incredibly lucky to have Katie with us today to shed light on this imperative topic and really give us training in this much needed area. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Katie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. Very excited to be here this morning and to be a part of your leadership training. First of all, congratulations to all of you. I know you had big events in August and a lot of work to get here and to serve in this role. We cannot thank you enough for taking time to be a volunteer leader and most importantly, to invest in your own development today so that you can really launch from here into a wonderful couple of years serving in your role. And our job is to just give you the tools to really help make that leadership opportunity possible. We're going to spend our time today going through and talking about unconscious bias. The idea here is that we need to understand kind of how our brain works and how, most importantly, how this impacts the interactions that we have on a daily basis. We are human at the end of the day, and oftentimes when we think about unconscious bias, we worry that it wasn't intentional and I didn't mean for something to sound that way. The reality is unconscious bias is something that just happens neurologically in our brain. But the best thing that we can do is understand it and then be super aware and spend time sort of noticing what's happening when we're meeting and interacting with others. As Jillian said, I own an HR consulting firm. I started my firm about 5.5 years ago after spending 20 plus years in corporate HR, including 15 years with Progressive Insurance. And we've been able to take all of that experience on the HR side and work with our clients in a myriad of HR spaces, one of which in particular is doing diversity, equity, and inclusion training for our clients. And so the session I'm going to take you through today gives you that background on unconscious bias, but then we're going to finish by doing some breakout discussions where you can really think about how does this concept of unconscious bias impact you as a volunteer leader, and where are the places in your interactions with folks that you really need to be thinking about this and paying attention to the impact that it will have. We are going to make today really interactive, which I know is hard on Zoom, but we've got some ways to do that between breakout sessions and chats. So please be sure when we start conversations, use your chat to answer as we go. Our goal today is really to make sure that first and foremost, you as a volunteer leader understand and recognize the role you play in creating a diverse and inclusive organization. It all starts with you as leaders. And when we step into this space and try to learn, it will make a big difference for you and for your collegiate members and for your alumni volunteers. And most importantly, again, we really want to make sure everybody has a good understanding of this concept of hidden bias, unconscious bias, also sometimes called implicit bias, depending on the organization and where you work, and then think about how it applies. Before we jump into the details of unconscious bias, I always like to start with sort of laying the groundwork for what do we mean when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many of you have probably heard of the iceberg model, but I always feel like it's a good starting point to make sure we're using some common language. The idea behind the iceberg as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion is that we have to recognize that diversity is truly a very broad topic. And intentionally, we're not just talking about the parts of the iceberg that are above the waterline, that are visible to people, but we also have to be aware of our unconscious bias as it relates to the things about the iceberg that are below the waterline. Now, for those of you who have not heard of the iceberg model before, the reason the iceberg is used in diversity and inclusion work as sort of the symbol of what we're talking about when we talk about diversity is because at the end of the day, we say the Titanic didn't sink because somebody missed the fact that there was a giant iceberg above the water. The Titanic sank because what they didn't acknowledge was just how much iceberg was underneath the water and wasn't visible. And so our goal when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion is to recognize that there's more to each individual than just the visuals that we see above the waterline. It's also about understanding how their diversity of the things that we can't see also impact our reactions to them, our interactions with them, and most importantly, they make up who the person really is. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we really are talking about the entire person and all of the things that make us diverse. That as a backdrop, I want you to stop and think. We're going to break unconscious bias down into some of the most basic concepts because it helps you understand how it is that your brain works, and that helps us really open our eyes to some of our biases. So I want you to take a moment and think about a food that you hate that you've never actually tasted. Go ahead and throw those in the chat. And Shanda is laughing because Shanda and I have been dear friends for a long time, and my list of foods I hate that I've never tasted is really long. But go ahead and put in the chat a food you hate, but you've never tasted. We've got oysters, escargot, horseradish, olives. Oh my gosh, Jen, we're gonna have to get you olives. Pumpkin spice, bacon. Okay, Sam Clark, we are definitely gonna have to do to brunch sometime. That's amazing. And you're probably wondering, what does food have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion? That seems weird. Oh, Megan Hill, I'm definitely with you. Tongue is not happening. So here's the key to this. At its very core, this concept of foods that we hate, that we've never even tried, are the epitome of an unconscious bias. Now, the picture that I had on the screen before I asked you this question is a picture of a whole bunch of M&Ms. And the reason that that picture is there is that is the perfect example for me of an unconscious bias. Years and years ago, when they came out with the blue M&M, I refused to eat blue M&Ms. Now, anybody in the world who's ever had a bag of M&Ms knows that the blue M&Ms and the green M&Ms and the red M&Ms taste exactly the same. But I was the best person to be with when I bought a bag of M&Ms because I would literally shove them all the blue ones to the side and eat the rest of the bag. So you automatically got a quarter of the bag of M&Ms right off of the bat. I knew full well in my head that blue M&Ms tasted the same way, but there was something in my brain that had a filter that said blue M&Ms are bad, so we're not going to eat them. Now, my list of food issues goes on and on and on. Things that I will not eat because of unconscious bias. Guacamole, a burrito because it's food inside of food. It literally is one of the easiest ways to think about. I have no actual factual frame of reference, but my brain is telling me there's an issue with that. And if we put it down, if we really boil this down to the heart of unconscious bias, this is one of the easiest ways to recognize that this is something our brain does. It doesn't make us bad people, but we have to recognize and acknowledge that this is what our brain is doing and think about how is it impacting us when we meet new people or when certain people approach us with issues. It's these biases, and particularly when they're not based in fact, that it suddenly becomes influential in our decisions, even when we didn't mean for that to be the impact. I'm going to put another picture up here on the screen. And I want you to throw in the chat the first word that comes to mind when you take a look at this photo. What's the first thing you think of when you see this particular picture? Go ahead and throw those in the chat. We've got robber, I love that, better COVID mask, snowstorms, so thief, burglar, lots of things that for most of us, these kinds of masks have a negative connotation. I always share this story. Years ago, I was teaching this class and I put this up, and I'm in the southwest corner of the United States. I was actually in Phoenix teaching at the time. And most of the class was from that corner of the country. Warm places, you didn't see ski masks everywhere. And so everybody said the same thing: robber, burglar, mugger, like all these bad words come to mind. There was one gentleman, Michael, who was from Minnesota, sitting in the classroom, and I'm watching Michael's face. And I happen to know Michael was from Minnesota, and he's looking around at the rest of the room like, what is wrong with you people? So I said, so Michael, what comes to your mind? And he says, well, it's Tuesday because I just wore one of those to get to work. And I was like, yes, his frame of reference based on his experience makes that ski mask not a scary thing. Me living in St. Louis, it's not super cold most of the time. It would be pretty rare that I would need a ski mask like that. So if that ski mask, somebody wearing that ski mask walks down the street, I'm hightailing it out of there pretty quickly. And certainly folks from the Southwest, where it was warm all the time, their frame of reference, based on what they saw in movies and things, was like, this is a negative connotation. So that's, again, a perfect example of, without us even realizing it, our brain is applying filters that really has an impact on how we might react to individuals. Now, I'm going to take you through another exercise, and I put a picture up on the screen. And while you're looking at this picture, what I need, I'm going to give you about 15 seconds, and I want you to pick out everything pink you can from this picture. Your goal is to find as many pink things as possible. If you like to write down the list, or just keep a mental list in your head of all of the things in the picture that are pink. I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to take it all in. All right, make sure you've gotten as many pink things out of the picture as you possibly can. And now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Go ahead and put your answers to these questions in the chat, and we'll see how folks did. First question: what was on the floor at the foot of the bed? A couple of folks that got a panda. Great job. Stuffed animal. Yep, perfect. Crystal, no clue. I like that. Not uncommon, Crystal. You're not alone. Second question: what two items are on the dresser at the foot of the bed? What two items are on the dresser at the foot of the bed? Answers are a little slower to come in on this one, right? Lots of can't remember, I'm not sure. Third question: what was on the floor in front of the window? Well, there was a dresser. All right, somebody got flowers with a vase. That's absolutely right. And then our last question: what two items were on the bed? Pillow and a blanket, laptop and a phone. Yes. All right, so go ahead. It's because it will drive some of you crazy. I will show you the picture again, because some of you are going, I swear I was looking at a picture. So real quickly, the item on the floor at the foot of the bed is the panda. You got several people got that one right. The two items on the dresser, I love the answer, what dresser? There's a picture frame and there's a lamp. The item on the floor in front of the window is a vase with flowers. And then on the bed, several of you did get pillow and blanket because they were pink. Also, a couple of you got laptop and phone. So go ahead and write in the chat, is there anybody who got 4 for 4? Anyone get 4 for 4? All right, how many of you got a few, but not all? 3 for 4, great job, Charlie. Great, we got a couple that got a few. All right, how many people think that they weren't even looking at the right picture? Yes. So the reason that exercise was so difficult for folks was, at the end of the day, I gave you a filter, right? I told you to look for everything pink. And so your brain focused on everything pink. And then I quickly asked you a bunch of questions about things that weren't pink. And so I made your brain look for things that wasn't what you were focused on. Unconscious bias is exactly this. And it's why it's so critical to how it changes how we see people and how we see the world. At the end of the day, an unconscious or an implicit bias is our brain using filters to make quick judgments and assessments of the world around us. Now, here's the reality. We have to have unconscious bias. There is way too much going on in this world for our brain to take it all in and for us to wait to make small decisions. So our brain has to have these series of filters. But it's really important, the more we're aware of those filters, then we can proactively go out and seek information to see, are those filters based on fact? Or are those filters just our brain's way of getting through all of the stuff going on around us? When we start to dig in deeper, we do a really great job of making sure that our pink filter is the right filter to be wearing for a certain situation. And more importantly, that we don't, especially when we're interacting with people and we're leading people, we don't let these unconscious biases turn into decisions that have negative impacts and negative consequences for people. And so the idea behind unconscious bias as we grow as human beings and as leaders is to raise your level of awareness of what your pink filters are and start to question them enough to say, wait a minute, is that actually right? Or is that just some lens that has been put in front of my eyes that's making me make decisions that may not be in the best interest of the people that we're interacting with? And this can play in so many different ways. And again, we never actually completely get rid of it. Perfect example, my husband and I, a couple months ago, we're walking the dog and he's in real estate and we're talking about a house that he's selling. And he said, he's telling me the story about the painter. And in the story about the painter, I had a question. So I said, well, what did he do? My husband just looked at me and goes, you teach this stuff. And you just said, what did he do? Because in what part of the story did I tell you that the painter was a man? And I was like, man, talk about getting it. So it's so key, like the things that we realize when we pay attention and we call each other out on it nicely. He was kidding, but he then turned around and did something similar himself. But when we get people around us who will sort of call us on those biases and those reactions, now we start to become much more aware of it. And we start to think about whether or not our information is actually based in fact. With that as a backdrop, I want you to go, we're going to do a quick exercise here. You are picking your financial advisor. Based purely on the pictures on the screen, you are picking your financial advisor. Go ahead and write in the chat for me, who do you pick? You've got 5 choices here and you have to pick a financial advisor just based on the picture. See what we've got in our chat. Got several folks picking Rochelle. We've got Susie, Jim. Somebody specifically said not Paul. So lots of variations, right? So that's what's I think really interesting is everybody had, like, people had different answers. There's no one right or wrong answer. And I think that's particularly important. So Monica, I'm going to pick on you if you don't mind, because Monica was the one who wrote not Paul. That is not uncommon. Paul almost never gets picked. Sorry. But tell me, Monica, what went through your mind? Why not Paul?
Oh, I was laughing at somebody else who said that, but I also agree because he didn't look very approachable at all. That was why I didn't pick him.
Not approachable. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Very good. So what about for folks that went with Rochelle? Somebody raise their hand. Somebody that went with Rochelle. Why did you pick Rochelle? What's appealing about Rochelle?
She looked confident.
Confident.
She was dressed professionally. Like the two that were, I was between two, but I liked the professional aspect of their photo and attire and whatnot.
It met your expectations for what a financial advisor should sort of look like. For those of you who went with Susie, why did you pick Susie? Who went with Susie? Anyone? All right, we've got a couple of folks that went with, it's interesting. So somebody said they actually would go with Paul first because he looked like he wasn't overselling. Rochelle got lots of votes. We've got several folks that went with Susie. Again, the idea here is all I did was give you a picture, but you mentally wrote a story in your head, right? For whatever reason. And some of you wrote, like, maybe even picked the same person, but for very different reasons. This is what's happening when we meet people for the first time. And this also is what's happening when we're interacting with people, that particularly when we've never met someone. And so it's really important that we recognize that for whatever reasons, those filters are there. And now we have to figure out whether or not they're based in fact, or whether or not we need to gather more information before we make decisions. And that's the underlying concept behind unconscious bias. So here's interesting factual information from studies that they've done. We make 11 judgments about people in the first 7 seconds that we meet them. 11 judgments. When you think about what you've accomplished in the first 7 seconds you meet somebody, you've probably said hello, you've checked out their clothing, you've maybe shook their hand pre-COVID. You've done very little actual conversation with somebody. It's probably been about the weather, if we're honest about it. And yet we're already started to make 11 judgments about people. This is really interesting. There was a study done years ago in the symphony space, and the symphonies at the national level were finding that their percussion departments were largely male. And they were trying to figure out, because at the regional level, the percussion departments were a much more of a mix of males and females. But as you went up to larger symphonies, fewer and fewer females in the percussion departments. And so as part of the study, they decided to do tryouts blind. And so they put a screen on the stage, and everyone who came out to audition had to come out behind the screen, and they started to make decisions on the folks for the percussion departments that way at the national level, hoping to change this percentage of male and females within their departments. The interesting part to all of that is, so the first time they did it, they saw a slight change in the way things were, who was selected, but not anything significant. So the next time they did the auditions, they went one step further, and they asked the folks coming out to audition, not only to go behind the screen, but to remove their shoes. Because there was a theory that, especially in the symphony where the stage is wood, the shoes of a man sounded different than the shoes of a female coming out on stage. And so they did the auditions barefoot so that nobody could hear the shoes walking across the stage. And as they did this, they started to see a significant difference in the percentage of females selected for the percussion departments versus men. And so all of a sudden you recognize nobody was sitting there going, like, actually even realized probably that they were listening for the shoes. It was just happening. But somehow in our filter, percussionists in a large symphony, like, the backdrop for that is it's supposed to be men. And so suddenly the men play better when they're auditioning. And so it's super interesting. Tim, thank you. That's why I don't wear tap shoes to an interview. Continue to do that, Tim, would be my recommendation. But it's those kinds of things that we need to recognize, that this is what's going on in our brain. But if we're not paying attention to it and creating situations where maybe that awareness is a little bit more heightened, it could be having the impact of influencing our decisions, even if that was not our intent. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really important to recognize and acknowledge that sometimes our intent can be outstanding. It does not mean our impact isn't somehow negatively influenced. And so it's all about understanding the impact of what's happening and make sure that we start to make changes. I want you to take a moment and pull out a piece of paper and divide it into 3 sections. I am not going to make you share this piece of paper, so don't worry. It'll just be between you and your own brain. In your paper, what I want you to do is write down all of the stereotypes you've heard. It does not mean you've believed them, but when I say each of these categories, what are the things that come to mind? So the first column is a man over 60. The middle column, write down all the stereotypes you've heard for a woman with a full sleeve tattoo. And the third one, Southern accent. Go ahead, take a minute or two to just write down, what are all the things that you heard, that you've either heard someone else say, that you've thought, what comes to mind immediately? What are these different pieces? Go ahead and make your list for each of these 3 categories. Give you another couple of minutes to finish up your list. All right, let's go ahead and think about it. I'm going to ask folks again, if you're comfortable, write in. It doesn't mean you believe them. They're just things that came to your mind. But when I say man over 60, what were some of the first things that, in terms of stereotypes that you've heard or thought, what comes to mind? Go ahead, feel free to go ahead and throw some in the chat so folks can see what we came up with. Again, does not mean anybody believes any of these things. Out of touch, entitled, gray hair, set in their ways, tech impaired, stubborn. Yeah, lots of different things that come to mind. On the same note, let's go to the other side of the house, the Southern accent. Tell me what comes to mind when you think about Southern accent. Again, stereotypes. It does not mean you believe them. What were some of the things that tend to come along? Southern charm and manners, racist, knows how to party, redneck and M. Yep. Again, cowboy, food, good cook is always in there. Again, we know these things not to be true, right? We know that that's not an actuality, but our brain has these filters in there somewhere. Now, as you look at your lists in each of the three categories, some of you may find, and as a general rule, it's not 100%, as a general rule, when we think about the stereotypes and the filters that our brain automatically goes to, they tend to be more negative than positive. And so it's really important, while unconscious bias can be positive or negative, and in fact, they're sometimes equally as challenging in terms of how they impact our decision-making, the reality of it is, in general, they tend to be more negative than positive. And so we have to be really aware of these things. When we teach this session from an interviewing perspective, it's really important for interviewers to understand this concept, because if you have a negative unconscious bias, you immediately, how many of us have done it? You're in an interview and 10 minutes in, you're like, oh, this person's a no. You've barely said hello, but you've already drawn conclusions. On the flip side of that, you fall in love with candidates in the first 10 minutes, and suddenly interviewers forget to ask all of the questions they were actually supposed to ask. And you're sure the person is wonderful based on this filter that you've put in place. We see this a lot in a lot of different spaces. One of the most common that we look at is in the military space, because military is one of those things that at certain times in our history, military has had a very negative unconscious bias to it. And for some people today, it still does. On the flip side, it can have a really positive unconscious bias. And all of a sudden we have interviewers who are like, oh, but they have former military experience, so I should hire them. And you're like, did you ask them any of the questions you needed to? So again, whether our experience is positive or negative is going to cloud that conversation. And if it clouds it to the point that for any reason, when we're interacting with somebody, we don't actually learn facts, now it has a negative impact, even if the bias was well-intended. And so our goal as you go forward in your leadership role is really to think about, where are my own unconscious biases and how are they impacting what's going on around me in different ways? I want to give you all a chance to actually have some really meaningful conversations about this. So we're going to put you into breakout groups, because it's hard to have meaningful conversations in large groups. I'm going to put you into breakout groups, and in your breakout rooms, what I want you to talk about in your group is, what are the situations where unconscious bias impacts you in your role as a volunteer leader? And start to think about, where are the places that maybe how you are coming to the table with information or your experiences could make a difference or an impact in how you interact with others in this volunteer leadership role. I'm going to give you a couple minutes in this to talk about it, and hold on just a second. Yes, great question, Jen. Thank you. I will copy the question into the chat so I'll send it out as a blast message, Jen, as soon as I get everybody into the room. Let me see what happens. How many people this is going to give me.
Let me know if you need assistance, Katie.
Yeah, I think I got it. I just had to, I started doing 2 things at a time. That became problematic. All right, here we go. We're going to open up the rooms and I will put it in the blast message. I think we have everyone back, so perfect. Well, hopefully those were meaningful discussions. I will say, even as I popped around to some of the breakout rooms, some of the situations that I heard people talking about are, when you're selecting your district directors, which individual is going to be a good fit for particular chapters, and how you describe that chapter to a potential district director. On the flip side, even as you think about, when a chapter calls and there's been a problem, you have some chapters that you're immediately like, ooh, they're my problem child, so they must have done it wrong, right? Versus your chapters that are generally in good shape. And then when there's a problem, like, you go into that conversation in a very different mindset. All of these situations, how you're going to interact with your individual teams, how you will interact on the collegiate level. I also think it's really important that we be having this conversation with our collegiates, because guess what? Our pledge process and all of the decisions around pledges are absolutely very much influenced at times by unconscious bias. And if we don't talk about it and we don't explore it, then we can often sometimes just let things go unspoken, and we never make real change as it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our goal today was really to start to give you the tools you need to think about, how do you work differently in this space? And how do you think about, and start to get better at understanding and recognizing your own unconscious bias. A couple of things that I would strongly suggest, and we will share these slides with everyone afterwards so that you have the ability to go in and click on these links. But there are some online unconscious bias assessments that give you just a good starting point to be more cognizant and more aware of your own biases. There's also some amazing videos out there that really talk about this concept, especially if you just have not had formal training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I encourage you to continue your journey. The more you open up your mind and your understanding of this, the easier it is to recognize when it's happening, and most importantly, understanding that even though it may not be your intent, you may be having an impact on people, and how do you work in that space, and how do you create a more inclusive space around you? So there's some really good videos in here that I think are helpful. Also, a couple of really good book links that I have found useful. One is Waking Up White, Finding Myself in a Story of Race. There's several others there that I've got included in these links that I think are just good reference tools for you. But honestly, as a volunteer leader, take some time as we wrap up this session today and you start going into other topics, take some time to think about, what was your takeaway from this? And what are a couple of things that you will do differently as you go forward and start interacting with people to really make sure you are aware of those biases and are changing the way that they are having impact on others. I want to stop there. Are there any questions, comments, key takeaways that I can help respond to for folks before we wrap up and move to the other session? Well, I hope you have a wonderful training all afternoon. I'm sure you all have an action-packed day. Thank you for participating. And if you do have thoughts or comments, my email will be in the information when I send out the slide deck. The email was in there, and I would love to hear from all of you about how you leverage this and where it will make an impact for you. So have a fantastic day, Jillian. I think with that, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Katie. That was a great session. And I know I enjoyed it. I had a lot of takeaways myself, and I know that all of you did as well. And in hindsight, I wish I saw the panda on the floor in the room exercise. Totally missed that one, but it was a really, really great exercise. So thank you so much for the session.
Absolutely. Now we're gonna... Don't worry, I do now eat blue M&Ms, so you don't get any of them from my bag anymore.
That's good. That's good. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for that. So now I'm standing between you guys and a 15-minute break. So what I'd like to just allow you guys to do is to feel free to take 15 minutes, feel free to grab your favorite snack. and bring it back to the session to enjoy. We will leave the Zoom open for those during the break, so feel free to leave your computer on. Just if you're going to step away, feel free to mute yourself and turn your camera off if you're stepping away. And we just want to keep it open for those that do want to continue with open networking. So we'll return at 10 before the hour. So go ahead, grab your snack. Feel free to stay on and continue the conversation if you'd like to do so. Thank you.
How's PFA, Jeremy?
It was great. A lot of fun.
Good, good, good. Yeah,
I mean, it's always a fun and valuable conference, but just being able to be human and do human things with humans. there's a lot of
understood. Yeah, this was my first human weekend for almost 2 years, I feel like. So yeah, no, I always enjoyed when I was able to go to that. So lots to learn.
It was interesting. It was definitely a smaller group than normal, which is sad, but it was a good group, and
Yeah,
I think just everybody's just very happy to be there.
sure. Yeah, well, good. It's done. I don't remember when it ended.
Yeah, it finished last night. So
Okay.
Yeah, Shanda, I was able to attend my first PFA conference yesterday as a board member, and it was pretty fun to network and see other people that Jeremy and Bill have known for years and introduce me to them.
Great.
they did a big DEI day yesterday, so Charlie came in for part of that.
Perfect. Excellent. So you've gotten lots of fill on great DE&I information and ideas and concepts between yesterday and today, and great.
I will never turn down DEI session. So
Yeah, well, and it's always so interesting, different people. I mean, so many of the same concepts, but the way you present it, a pink room is, an M&Ms is a different approach than probably what you saw yesterday. And, sometimes some of those trigger just different thoughts and ways to approach it with different audiences too. So good.
You enjoying your trip, Shanda?
Yeah. Today was a lot of, we'll see what happens with, everything going on here. But yes, it's been a nice little getaway to see several humans in 3D. There were hugs. I think I may be bruised from a couple of hugs, actually. Seriously, it's kind of weird. But no, very, very nice. The gathering last night, they had a live band and outside. Wow. Yeah, it was fun. Taco truck. So lots of fun.
Ron, what did you grab as your snack?
Still on mute. I have a little bit of vodka and some wasabi peas.
Wow.
So,
Somebody's winning the session.
Very hearty lunch.
I have a cold sausage egg bagel from Starbucks from a couple hours ago. I'm still nibbling on.
Yeah, I didn't go very fortified in my snack, but it's okay. The grocery trip is after this call, so there's not a lot to grab.
There you go.
All right. Good afternoon, brothers. My name is Chelsea Fix, and I serve as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Vice President. I had the privilege of learning about the Hub during my tenure as an educational and leadership consultant. So today, I'd like to review the key aspects of the Hub RVP should be familiar with. And there are several different modules in the Hub to choose from when you're collecting chapter information, but the ones we're going to focus on today are Forms, Dashboard, Reports, and Help, the Hub Help module. All right, so in the Forms module, you can review all completed forms for a specific chapter. So if you want to see forms from the chapters past, you can even select the form year. So this goes all the way back to 2012. This module is also where you'll view and take action on strategic plans. So once the chapter president has approved any pending strategic plans, they'll appear in your approval pipeline. So if you pay attention to a lot of those different forms that are behind that select form year to view that display screen, you'll see a couple of different forms that can typically be in your queue right now. So once you take a look at that queue and you have a strategic plan in your queue, there you'll have the option to approve, deny, or permanently deny a strategic plan. I would strongly advise against denying a strategic plan permanently. Once this has been done, staff can't reverse your decision and the chapter can't resubmit for CMP credit. So a strategic plan will only remain available until a certain date as well. So the fall strategic plan, which is filled out in the spring, is only available until June 30th. The spring strategic plan, which is filled out in the fall, is only available until February 2nd. So after these dates, the chapter cannot resubmit and the RVP cannot approve or deny the form, unfortunately. So if you haven't appointed all of your district directors yet, some other forms may pop up for your approval. So if you see any of those forms in your queue, go ahead and start approving and denying those forms so that the chapter is able to receive CMP credit for those items and your district directors don't feel behind once they're appointed. All right, so the dashboard, there are quite a few tabs in the dashboard module of the hub. The basic info section reveals necessary information about the chapter. So like their status, if they're on guidance, this would be listed here, anything like that. Ideal chapter size, that's also right here, and their dues paying member history. And that's kind of at the bottom of that screen. And it kind of shows you how the chapters fluctuated over the years. So the one that I really want to focus on today is the finances tab, because that's the one that you should be most familiar with. It contains the chapter's tax ID or EIN number, as it's also called. It contains vital finance, balance information, and recent invoices. It's important to understand the timing of a chapter's balance and how their balance was incurred. For example, if a chapter owes over $4,000, that may seem like a lot, but if that amount is not yet due or current, there's really no cause for concern. So pay attention to what the amount is for as well. So if, let's say that $4,000 is for collegiate dues, that's a typical amount for a larger chapter, especially if that's a recent amount that's showing. So there's also the pledging initiation tab on the dashboard. Here you can download a current copy of a chapter's pledge education program. So if you're going to go meet with a chapter in person or even virtually, for example, you can download or print this program, and that's something that you can use while you're actually talking to that chapter. And they should also have it distributed to all of their pledges. All pledges must receive a copy of that pledge education program at some point, preferably on the very first day. Reports. So the reports module contains a lot of useful information, a lot. Each category has something beneficial to offer. The chapter events category is where you can find a list of all upcoming chapter events in your region, if those events have been reported in the calendar of the hub, that is. So if you're considering visiting a chapter and wonder what their next event is and when it's occurring, you should be able to find it in that report. DDs and RVPs should pay attention to chapter trial results as well. That you can find that in the hub also through the reports tab. So the trial results section is in the chapter information report category. So if a chapter reported a trial in the hub, it would definitely be displayed here. If you've heard a chapter discussing a trial that ended within the last month and their report doesn't return any data when you try to search for it, they'll need to report it as soon as possible. So according to the individual discipline policy, the trial secretary must report the chapter trial online at, through the hub, through the members module by the 15th of the month following the trial. And if a trial is not reported within that time frame, it becomes null and void and it must be held again. So make sure you're monitoring that and making sure that different chapters have reported those trials occur, recently. So the national events report category is especially beneficial. So here you can see who's registered for LEAD, Grand Chapter Congress, and other national events noted on the Delta Sigma Pi website. Through the reports tab, you can additionally view pledge education program dates for all the chapters in your region. This can be found by clicking the chapter information report category and then the chapter pledge education program dates report. It's a nice report because you don't have to continuously look through the dashboard for each chapter's pledge education program dates. So through the national reports category, there's also a regional CMP summary report that you can view. And that's convenient for those wondering how their chapters are doing this semester or even for the full year for CMP. So if you don't want to sift through all that data when you're looking at reports, you can also export the report to Excel by clicking on the button at the top right of the screen. The final category you can find in the reports module is titled Pledge Module Completion. And if a chapter's pledge education program is a few weeks in, according to their dates in the hub, that is, yet pledges haven't started their modules, this is a major cause for concern, as the modules become available based on the dates provided by the chapter in their pledge education program. So that means they're behind if they haven't even started and they're supposed to be a few weeks in. So if pledges haven't touched their modules, the VPPE likely isn't following their pledge education program, which is in violation of national policy, and that chapter is subject to disciplinary action for not following policy. The last module to cover today is the Hub Help module. So this is great for when you're trying to assist a district director or a chapter with CMP or hub questions, or just discover how things work for yourself. This module contains several links and videos which cover how to do everything with step-by-step instructions. So it's got several videos that you may find really beneficial. All right, so here I've listed some helpful resources for those interested in learning more about the hub. I'd also encourage you to take a look at the hub information on the membership changes in your PVP or RVP toolkit that was sent. I know that was emailed out to everyone. Those membership changes are very, very important when we're talking about the hub. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact your PVP or even a staff member at the hub at dsp.org. They're always happy to assist you with anything you might need and support.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea. So now going into a little bit of our ritual updates. All right, some general updates. In regards to the general ritual updates at Grand Chapter Congress, the Grand Chapter extended the virtual and socially distanced rituals through the end and close of the 2022 special meeting of the Grand Chapter, while authorizing the board to reinstate the pre-COVID-19 2019 ritual book as they deem appropriate prior to that time. So the Grand Chapter also approved the use of ritual at hybrid events, allowing for a portion of the chapter to be in person while also allowing others to view the event, including ritual via approved alternatives. Now, the socially distanced ritual book must be followed during this hybrid ritual. And at this time, there is guidance and further instructions being discussed and will be communicated to the leaders once finalized. So that is still being worked on. Lastly, the optional use of full regalia was also approved. So within the last year, during socially distanced ritual initiation in general, robes were not utilized. Now during this upcoming academic year, that socially distanced initiation, regalia is required. However, the robes are the optional part. And in regards to the virtual initiation, regalia is not being utilized. Now, going into the memorization of initiations, as chapters are beginning to prepare for the memorization of the initiation ceremony, it may be a good time to begin discussing who will verify the initiation. On this slide, you will see a section of the initiation ceremony rubric that was created to assist the person verifying the ceremony. This rubric can be found under the resources of the district director or by searching initiation ceremony rubric on the website. As stated on this rubric, the approval of the requirement under CMP is at the discretion of the verifier. I always recommend chapters discussing what are the expectations of the verifier. Obviously, you will see that there's some items on here, but at the end of the day, it's whoever is verifying it that has a conversation with the chapter. All right, going into a little bit of updating Pledge Education program dates, which thank you, Chelsea, for going a little bit in depth on where to find the specific program that was approved. If there are any updates or changes in regards to the Pledge Education program, they must be sent to hub@dsp.org for review and approval. A lot of the dates in regards to the program need to be approved and updated in the system just so the pledges receive their modules at the appropriate time. And obviously a lot of CMP items are also coincide with the program, such as, submitting your pledges into the hub, ordering crown and deltas, ordering badges, submitting the initiation report. So if a ceremony was intended to be socially distanced, but the chapter submitted it as a virtual ceremony, the chapter submitted the Pledge Education program in May. A lot of things have changed since then. So we are more than happy to work with chapters to make sure that their program follows the dates that they want to follow. But at the same time, we need to review our regalia schedule and make sure that we are able to send them a trunk for their initiation. All chapters that submitted a virtual location to be on Zoom or online that do need, like I said, that do need a trunk, please let us know as soon as possible. Or in the other instances, if a chapter wanted to host a socially distanced initiation ceremony, but now want to host a virtual one, that could be an easier change, but we want to make sure that we're not sending them a regalia trunk when it's not necessary. We have been receiving a lot more requests for updates, which this is not uncommon, but it will take us a little bit more time in regards to reviewing our schedule, as well as making sure we are corresponding with the appropriate chapters in that who's picking up or who's sending to what chapter. So this might be something that as volunteers, you're asked questions on, we're always happy to help through the process as well. Lastly, some additional resources can be found on the website by searching ritual for virtual and socially distanced ceremonies, or going directly to dsp.org/2020 ritual. On this page, you could find the ritual books, images for virtual ceremonies, the virtual operations and logistics guide, alongside with additional resources. And more information is to come on the hybrid approved ceremony as well. Pass it on to Tyler to talk a little bit more on risk management.
All right. So I'm going to apologize in advance if there's some wind issues. I am on the campus of IU today, so we are at the limestone capital of the world. So I'm going to wrap up this thing with the not so fun part of the role, which is reviewing the risk management stuff. It can be educational. We want it to be educational for leaders. So As I go through the policy itself, there's going to be a bunch of words on the screen. So I'm going to try to paraphrase them and break them down into layman's terms. And you can find the individual code of conduct and risk management policy in the National Policies and Procedures Manual under A and B. And these are the first two entries in our policies and procedures. So that kind of indicates their importance. So we'll get started here with the first part of our risk management policy in a nutshell, alcohol, drugs, and fraternity events. So here's the basics. Events with alcohol have to comply with all federal, state, local laws and campus policies. So federal law is going to govern illegal drugs and controlled substances at fraternity events. So if it's been decriminalized in a state, illegal drugs and controlled substances are still not going to be permitted at chapter, regional, provincial, or national events. Alcohol may only be provided at events essentially through a cash bar or a BYOB system. So no open bars are going to be allowed at fraternity events, including chapter formals. BYOB events should have some type of a redemption system. So if they're using some type of a ticket system, and they want to make sure that they are bringing what a reasonable person would consume in whatever their time frame is. So a reasonable person is probably not going to individually consume a handle of alcohol in a 2 to 3 hour time period. So again, that reasonable person is keeping things in mind. No bulk quantities of alcohol means that kegs for BYOB parties, fish bowls, or kiddie pools full of cans of beer, big no-nos for our risk management policy. Chapters can't charge cover for their events or use chapter funds to pay for alcohol outside of for their event. Again, it's that BYOB piece. Chapters can use their chapter funds to rent out third-party vendors because they're paying for space and they're paying for service. They're not paying for alcohol, okay? And then if a Delta Sig chapter is planning on hosting an event with another organization, they are able to openly allow for alcohol at their event, we're gonna have to likely decline the invitation to co-host that event. But if they are willing and wanting to follow our policies when it comes to alcohol and drugs, we can very much take them up on that offer. So our chapters also cannot earn money through alcohol sales. And this is, again, collegiate chapters and alumni chapters. They can do a profit share with restaurants, but can't make money off the bar sales. So chapters also can't get a kickback from a promoter for individuals getting into a club. And lastly, if they're working with an on-campus food service provider at sporting events, large football games or basketball games that the venue sells alcohol, for them to receive money from that food service provider, the Airmarks, the Seduxos of the world, they will need to work with that provider to make sure that they are not pouring and selling alcohol, but working maybe some type of food or programs or some other spot in the venue. The last thing that I want to point out on this slide is letter J. I hope that I and K are pretty self-explanatory, but I want to throw out a couple of examples here for drinking games, and this is where I really become the fun police. But beer pong and flip cup and ice luges and shot skis and shotgunning beers, you know, all the things that we all did in college that we probably still weren't supposed to do, they all fit in this category of rapid consumption of alcohol and drinking games. So then moving on to our hazing policy. Again, I throw up our definition of hazing in our national policies and procedures. I'm not going to repeat it and read it verbatim, but any event we hold as a fraternity at any level, from chapter meetings to social events to leads and grand chapter congress, we want to make sure that our members and our guests should not feel subjected to having to violate laws, consume unknown substances, feel fear of physical or mental abuse, or feel concerned about their own health and safety. Okay, our brotherhood should create an environment where their health and safe, or where our members and guests are going to feel comfortable and privileged to participate in our activities. I do want to point out the highlighted section that basically says that an individual volunteering in an activity that is considered hazing is not a defense. Even though someone may volunteer, they may only be volunteering because they feel that that's the only way to gain acceptance is to volunteer. So there are some states that have anti-hazing laws that individuals can and have been arrested following allowing themselves to be hazed. So again, that piece of being willing and a voluntary participant is not a defense against hazing. So please make sure that you are familiarizing yourselves with state and anti-hazing statutes within your regions and provinces. Hazingprevention.org is going to be a great resource for learning about the laws across the country, and many states are continuously updating them due to different incidents that may happen on their campuses throughout the country. Turning now to discrimination. Again, I'm not going to read our definition of discrimination. The way that I like to explain it to our students is that our fraternity was founded by 4 diverse individuals with numerous identities, ambitions, interests, experiences, and statuses. We have continued to evolve as an organization, and we've included many individuals who have challenged our fraternity to continue to make it great over the last 100 years. Our fraternity needs individuals of all origins, of identities, experiences to challenge it to continue to be great. And so if we don't embrace all individuals, we are going to undoubtedly miss out on an opportunity to further a higher standard. For assault and battery, this is the extent of our policy. I do encourage you to be familiar again with the state statutes where your host institutions do reside. Moving on, sexual misconduct. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth in a few slides regarding sexual misconduct, harassment, and assault, but I did want to point out our policy does define many terms associated with the policy in and of itself. Similar to what I discussed with our anti-hazing policy, our fraternity activity on any level should be a safe environment for all who can and wish to engage with us. Weapons, firearms, and explosives and incendiary devices policy is read on a couple of different levels. First, on the chapter level, if federal, state, local laws and campus policies allow for members to carry on campus and they are permitted appropriately, they can do so, as long as there's not something in their local chapter policies and procedures as well. When it comes to if it's at a third-party venue for a social event or other type of event, and the venue doesn't allow for carrying, our members also cannot carry. When it comes to our regional, provincial, and national fraternity events, pardon me, all of these things are going to be prohibited. All right. So even if the venue is going to allow for it, our national policies say that for regional, provincial, and national events, weapons, firearms, explosives, incendiary devices are not going to be permitted at those events. Okay, our members should leave those at home. And then the last couple of pieces of our risk management policy, chapter houses and meeting facilities. Hopefully it's self-explanatory, but no chapter or alumni corporation may have a facility in their portfolio. This doesn't mean that a handful of Delta SIGs can't individually sign leases and live in an off-campus rental together or in a residence hall suite together. It just means that they can't sign a lease under the name of Delta Sigma Pi, only as individuals. And then aside from our policy distribution, the last piece here to the policy on retaliation, do want to point out that this does not just apply to retaliating against other members. It does also apply to retaliating against non-members who may have provided information or is cooperating with a compliance investigation or seeking guidance regarding a concern within the chapter. Okay, so it is not limited to just our members. So jumping into managing some of these allegations, now that we've got all of that out of the way, want to go over a couple of pieces that you can utilize if a situation does arise to you as a fraternity leader. So want to start with a couple of common risk management violation allegations that we get. You and your leadership team, as well as us at the central office, are going to receive a variety of allegations throughout the year. Some are going to be founded, some are going to be unfounded, some are going to be something completely different than what originally came to us. Want to point out some high times being the first couple of weeks following move-in, even before classes start, right around initiation times, and before extended breaks like Thanksgiving, winter recess, spring recess, and summer. Some of the allegations are going to get to you or to us immediately. Others might be weeks or months before we actually see those allegations to get to somebody who can assist the chapter in managing them. We want to, they're going to come in a variety of different ways as well. So they could be phone calls, they could be anonymous emails with or without screenshots. Some of those anonymous emails are going to be have those accounts deleted immediately. So never know how they're going to get to you, get to us, but they are, unfortunately, undoubtedly coming. One of the things that we want to do is we want to try to maintain an active dialogue with the informant. Even if they are looking to remain anonymous, they never give you a name. If we can continue a dialogue, we can continue to learn about things that are happening within the chapter that we may be able to address through a multitude of means and or help the chapter manage. So, of course, the biggest piece of information gathering that we get is really just through casual conversation of our students. They are going to disclose things that they may or may not realize are going to be violations of our risk management policy. And so this is the opportunity really that we have to educate them. So one of the pieces that I would highly encourage your teams is to be familiar with the academic calendar of their campuses on all of the varying levels. Again, kind of looking at some of those high times and utilizing the pledge education program form to know when the initiations are going to be happening. So when an allegation gets to you or gets to us, a couple of different ways that we handle things. In whatever form, it's important to treat it as an allegation until facts can be confirmed. The last thing we want to do is for our students to feel that their fate has already been sealed and predetermined, and then they shut down and we can't discuss this. They lose confidence in their leadership or central office or whoever it is that they have been working with. So we want to maintain that relationship with the students and treat everything as an allegation first. As I mentioned earlier, I truly do believe working through allegations with students is a genuine opportunity to identify and assisting chapters in correcting some of their operational missteps. Keep in contact with your local levels of leadership. Students are likely to share information with DDs, new assistant DDs before the RVP and as it moves up the chain. Keeping PVPs informed and utilizing them as a resource. They've been through a variety of different chapter situations and may be able to provide some additional context, guidance, steps, or other resources that they may be familiar with, having worked with a chapter in that particular area, alumni, or that particular chapter in general. Also, use us as a resource. Keep us up to date. We see different things across the country here at Central Office and over the years. So should a situation be founded or unfounded, there's likely some suggestions that we can provide to you, provide to the students, that even if it has nothing to do with the situation that originally came to us, they can find some type of way to improve their operations. If you were, this is where I said I was going to go a little bit deeper into that sexual misconduct, assault, and harassment. If you do receive an allegation of sexual harassment, assault, or misconduct, don't necessarily dissuade a chapter or individual from pursuing action through the chapter or the fraternity, but encourage them to utilize their campus's Title IX office. The Title IX office on the campus is going to have individuals who are trained to review these allegations, provide local resources, and additionally, using the campus office is typically going to be more beneficial for the student and our chapter because they're the ones that can issue directives that are going to impact various levels of campus life, whether it be a residence hall, other student organizations, dining facilities, etc. Using the fraternities process is really only going to impact the interactions of individuals with that situation with fraternity activities, whether they be chapter meetings and events. Chapter officers may feel like they need to do something right now, and that's not always going to be the case. The chapter is not an investigative body, and they really shouldn't act as one. For all allegations, though, where some will subsequently lead to individual or chapter actions, evaluate those needs. What's the behavior or decisions that need to be addressed, and what are the means available that the chapter has to address them locally through their campus, within the chapter, utilizing local leadership, or their fraternity actions that need to be considered. And speaking of which, do you want to talk a little bit about the menu of items that we have to the board for chapter assistance and discipline? Nearly all of these actions are going to need to be authorized by the Grand President or their designee. So want to start with assistance actions. None of these are considered disciplinary. However, they can be issued concurrently with disciplinary actions. So encouragement and concern letters are simply, hey, we noticed this. We wanted to let you know that we noticed this. And in many cases, they are going to be accompanied by some general suggestions for continuing good work or improving on areas of operation. Guidance is going to be similar to encouragement and concern, except it's going to be accompanied by some specific recommendations that the chapter can choose to follow to get back on track. Chapters can choose to follow all, some or none of those recommendations, and completion of guidance recommendations or other actions can be determined based on how they progress through. Many chapters do look at guidance as a disciplinary action when they see those recommendations, and recommendations are generally generated to improve specific behaviors that could lead to the chapter's detriment if they continue down that path. Receivership is one of the few actions that can be offered by the executive director. This is an agreement between the chapter and the fraternity to basically turn over some of their officer operations to an alumni member who's going to assist them in learning the proper way to execute those duties. If this is a route to be pursued, we would encourage local leadership have a conversation with the chapter prior to receivership being offered, just to learn if the chapter would be willing to accept the assistance. Additionally, it's best to have a receiver in mind and a conversation with that individual before this assistance is offered to the chapter. And the last assistance action that I wanted to bring up is reorganization. This action is also an agreement between the fraternity and the chapter, and is similar to, is right down the path of a last resort. To offer reorganization does require a vote of the board, and local leadership should again have a conversation with the entire chapter to learn if they would accept it. Again, what happens in the reorganization is chapter members and local leaders can somewhat clean house of individuals who no longer wish to participate as collegiate members, or who should no longer be participating as a collegiate member. Additional objectives do get created as part of a reorganization for those that do remain, wish to remain members at the collegiate level before the chapter fully functions on its own. And that's just some the assistance actions. I am going to jump a little bit into some of the disciplinary actions. Like assistance actions, they do need to be authorized by the Grand President or their designee. First is a warning letter, and that is typically issued when there's evidence that a chapter has violated a fraternity policy and extensive correction action is not needed. So it was a mistake, they shouldn't do it again. Many times pledging and initiation policies would receive a warning for a violation. Probation can be issued when there's a violation of policy and specific objectives are included to correct those specific behaviors, similar to guidance. Grand President can authorize this without a vote of the board if that particular chapter has had some type of disciplinary action, whether it be a previous probation, a warning letter, suspension. It can be issued if none of that disciplinary action has happened within the last 4 years. If the chapter has not had any disciplinary action in the last 4 years, it does require a unanimous vote of the board for the grand president to issue that probation. Suspensions can be issued again by the grand president with a 2/3 vote of the board, and a suspension can only be issued for up to 90 days. It can be renewed for an unlimited number of suspension terms, but the renewal does require a unanimous vote of the board to renew that. Suspension is really going to be issued when when it's in the best interest of the fraternity to halt the chapter's activities, whether so that we can investigate from the fraternity side, or if the institution is looking into some type of allegation as well. And then finally, the most extreme action that we have at our disposal is in charter revocation, which is a 4/3 vote of the board, and the grand president is authorized to do that with that vote. This means that the chapter is going to cease to exist, and we will not probably look at returning to the host institution with less than 5 years from the revocation. So those are some of the chapter pieces that we have. Going to jump a little bit into individual discipline before we do some Q&A and some of these pieces that individual leadership should be aware of with the individual discipline. So wanted to go over some of the myths when it comes to the individual discipline policy that some chapters have. Common one is being things like fraternity members, it being a national policy for fraternity members not to drink alcohol in letters. Some chapters may have put that in their local policy, but it's not a national policy. And being that strict would mean that none of our members could wear letters while having an adult beverage while they are out at a restaurant having dinner. So just want to touch on a couple of other myths that we have floating around the fraternity. So first, and this is very common, chapters can not issue any fines or other penalties without having a trial. Some chapters will have in their local policies and procedures some type of structure for attendance or missing dues, and they will automatically tack on fines. These are not things that can happen with our chapters. There does need to be a trial. A chapter can have guidelines in their policies and procedures, but know that a trial committee can absolutely deviate from that as they are just guidelines. Next, the executive committee trials. They can only be held for attendance and financial delinquency. Anything else has to go through the chapter's trial process. Next, the the next piece I want to touch on tend to be questions where members have been involved in some type of physical incident, whether it be one of those Title IX incidents or physical altercation amongst the chapters members. Do keep in mind that chapters should have and the executive committee should have built into some of their policies and procedures some mechanism to excuse members that are involved in some type of investigation for the institution or need to step away because they're involved in some type of altercation that may impact the chapter in and of itself. The chapter can't suspend an individual without a trial, but they do have the ability to excuse them for whatever period of time is necessary for them to do so. And the last piece that I wanted to jump in here as far as a myth goes before we do our Q&A is that many times our chapters think that preferring charges only have to come through the officers or the executive committee of a chapter, and that's not the case. Any individual brother does have the ability to prefer charges against another member. And so those are some of the common myths that we see, and that was a whole lot of information in the last 45 or so minutes. And so I do want to spend the rest of our time opening it up for questions. And so I don't know if Shanda is going to mediate that for us, if we've seen anything in the chat, but feel free to fire away with your questions.
I did see a question regarding ritual. I don't know if it was responded to, but Jasmine, did you see that? If a chapter listed a physical location for their initiation, they will automatically get a trunk, and we need to update if they are changing to a fully virtual and do not want a trunk. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, so I did see that question. Yes. So
Okay,
if a chapter listed, it's going to be in whatever hall, building, whatever. Yes, they will automatically receive a trunk. Now, if that is no longer the case, if based on campus regulations, I did forget to mention that part, obviously follow local, state, federal campus guidelines at all times in regards to wearing of masks, how many people are allowed to gather inside of, specific rooms during these ceremonies. But yeah, if anything needs to change, let us know, and we'll work with the chapters to make sure, they're prepared for it.
Great. What other questions do you all have? Like Tyler said, that was a ton of information very quickly. So, but lots of great information and things that I'm sure many of you had questions about, but did it spark some other questions? Looks like from Jen, we have a pro tip: establishing trust between your chapters and your DDs before these situations happen is important. In any scenario brought to my attention, I've had the student and alumni leaders be able to reach out to me right away and work through the appropriate channels and resources to resolve and do it with care. So, yep, definitely a good tip for new folks that have not had to deal with situations yet. And hopefully you won't have situations to deal with. That would be even better. But what other questions? And you're welcome to turn your audio on if you'd like. IDP policy is changing soon, remember, but that is still over a year away, correct, Tyler, based on current things? So
yeah, that's correct. The new IDP is scheduled for about July 1, 2023 is when the recommendation is for, unless for some reason it gets done and ready to go sooner, but bank on the July 1, 2023 date.
So current policy is current policy, even though that is out there hanging. Just make sure folks are aware of that. What else? What other questions? Any? Yeah, Jen.
Okay, I guess two-part. One, what is our role as national leaders? I know we focus mostly on how members interact with each other, like process policy-wise, when it comes to some of these difficult situations, like that we are not investigators or qualified or trained to do so. Do we have to be mandated reporters in any of those scenarios if they're mentioned in passing or we hear them in a casual conversation? And related to that, if a chapter doesn't want to use their Title IX office, or whoever is bringing up these allegations doesn't want to use Title IX office, is there anything we do to step in, or is that like, what's the line between like us stepping in as a leader and the personal choice?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So let me start with your second question. When it comes to individuals, it is it's their obligation one way or the other to utilize whatever they are comfortable with. I think the biggest piece for us as fraternity leaders is reminding them that our policy applies to just the fraternity. That if if it's a harassment issue that is happening within a residence hall, just if they get expelled from a fraternity, that does not necessarily mean that that's going to impact the incident and the issues that are happening in residence halls. So helping our students understand that, I think, is a big part of answering that question. We can't force them to utilize their Title IX office. Title IX is going to have their own process by law that they need to follow. And so if they are not comfortable with that, then we have what we have to help them from a fraternity standpoint. Regarding being a mandated reporter, I am not a lawyer. I'm not going to claim to be a lawyer. I also know that many of us as volunteers don't work on college campuses where that a staff member may be a mandated reporter. Unless Jeremy may have some additional information, I don't believe that we fit that mandated reporter status unless you are a staff member on an institution and you are a mandated reporter by that institution.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? with like in case like a scenario does happen, like do we want to provide them outside resources, or do we want to stay as an unbiased party, like legal, not legal, like law enforcement, that type of thing? Do we want to suggest that, or do we want to stay unbiased?
Sorry, I'm making sure to mute and unmute because of the wind here. I would say that it's always good to have the resources available. Know what they are from both a campus standpoint, because many times the students don't even know what those resources are going to be. And from a local standpoint, if they don't want to utilize the campus resources. I think ultimately our goal is to help them manage through our process. We're not the investigators. We are just helping them manage through our process. We can be supportive, we can be an ear, but we are not counselors. We are not investigators. We are not trained in Title IX. And so we want to make sure that, yes, have the resources for anybody who may have them in our back pocket, but our primary focus is getting them, if they're utilizing the fraternity process, getting them through that fraternity process and understanding what that is going to look like and all of the potential outliers that come with it.
Yeah, and Megan just made a good comment. Chapter advisors are super helpful in this space to help find your campus resources. So make sure you are engaging those, your chapter advisors, and it can only help to be working together. Jen, to the point I made earlier about establishing contact early with the school definitely helps before these types of scenarios happen. Great. Local leaders recommend that know the resources on mental health on options as well. Other questions, great comments, great things that are being shared here. Let's see.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeremy. Jeremy mentioned chapter advisors. Do be aware that many chapter advisors will be mandated reporters as faculty members, or even if they're outside of the faculty ranks, especially if they are in a residence hall capacity or a student activities capacity, fraternity and sorority life capacity. There's a likelihood that they are a mandated reporter under the Trump era Title IX guidelines.
What else? So, Charlie.
I know there's been a lot of resources sent out to RVPs about webinars from the different staff members. On the Tyler, the presentation that was done today, is that the same stuff that's on that your chapters have, that your area has already provided to RVPs and us, or can this presentation be sent out as additional resource for us to reference as needed?
As far as distribution of this, Shanda, I'm going to defer that to you. So I think that right now, the presentation that I gave to you all is very similar to what we are giving to our chapters from the risk management policy standpoint. From the other standpoints, I believe that this is probably the more comprehensive than what we have done previously. So as far as distribution, I'm going to let Shanda answer that.
Sure. Katie had also mentioned she had slides she was going to share with everyone. So in the next couple of days, we'll bundle up her slides and this presentation and anything else that is deemed something that you wish to receive, and we'll get that packaged up and sent out to this group.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one thing to definitely keep in mind, many of you thankfully have not had to deal with these issues yet, and maybe you never will. That would be even better. Knowing the policy is one thing, but when you do get into a situation where you need the help, just ask for it. Like we've talked about, the advisors, the local leaders, staff, people are there that have dealt with these various things and can help guide you and help walk you through it. And don't forget that. And that's true for any scenario of things going on in your role. None of us can be experts about everything, and all of us need help at times to get through things. So don't feel bad for asking for help or asking questions. Asking questions just makes you a stronger leader, in my opinion. So what else? Anyone else have questions? And anything related to Chelsea's hub presentation or ritual that you might need clarification on before we move on? All right. Not seeing anything. Well, the good news is when you think of that question later, you know where to go now. Those staff presentations that we also distributed about a month ago, there's a lot of good information in those also that you can find. dsp.org also has a lot of resources. Just use the search feature to find different things. But again, you have a lot of human resources ready and available. Tyler, any closing comments from you from this area?
No, just thank you all for all of the work that you do in your service to the fraternity. Your investment and engagement does make our jobs a lot easier. And having that information and whenever we can support you, please reach out to us. As Chelsea had said, hub@dsp.org gets us all, or you can individually email us as well. Thank you all for all that you do for the fraternity.
Yeah, and I put it in the chat a bit ago, but in case you're not keeping up there, because there's a lot of chat going on, there is a risk management for leaders webinar on Tuesday night that is exclusively for this group and your district directors and your chapter advisors. It is with Holmes Murphy, our insurance provider, and they're kind of taking it to a higher level of information of kind of what your risks and roles and responsibilities with risk are. So that is happening this Tuesday, the 14th at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't yet, please register for that and attend. If you can't find the registration link, you should have gotten an email from us at the end of the week and a couple of others with that link, but feel free to email me, let me know, and I'll make sure you get what you need and we'll get you signed up. So I think otherwise we're ready to turn this over to Tricia. Is that correct, Tyler?
I believe that is the plan.
Okay, so Tricia, governance, it's all yours. Thank you, Tyler.
Hey, great. Thanks so much, Tyler. Thanks, Shanda. I'm going to share my screen here. All righty. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. This section fits well with what Tyler just shared with us. We wanted to take a few minutes to give an overview of what governance means in our workings of our organization and our overall structure. So our governance structure and processes is how we deliver the best value and support to our membership. When thinking about our governing structure or documents, the best way to think of it is this. Our bylaws serve as the rules for the organization, while our policy and procedure manual serves as the guidelines for our organization. So as leaders, we are all expected to fully carry out and effectively promote fraternity bylaws and policies, as well as our programs events. And now, as you've heard before, we don't expect everyone to have bylaws and the policy manual memorized. But to know where to go for the resources that you're looking for, and as Shanda mentioned, not being afraid to ask the questions to find the answers within those documents that you may need. So throughout the years, we do make changes within these documents in order to ensure that our organization continues to follow governing laws, as well as recognition of changing times, best practices, and our environment so that we are able to continue to deliver the best value to our membership. I mean, a great example of that is technology. The technology that we have today, well, that wasn't in our policy manual 20 years ago when communication was via mail, where today our primary form of communication is via email and much, much faster. So the best way that I like to think about our governing structure is in 3 levels. So we are ruled by our bylaws, we are guided by our policies, and we use our procedures to successfully carry out the work of the organization that follows the bylaws and the policies. And as Tyler reviewed, unfortunately, dealing with risk management can be a significant part of each of our jobs. So we are each responsible for serving as a positive example for how a Delta Sig should behave and as a coach to our chapters and members on proper behavior and compliance with our risk management policy. So as we kept saying, as a volunteer, have a working knowledge and understanding of our risk management policy, our code of conduct, our pledge education program, and be prepared when we do need to act in the case of any violations. But it's also important to think about the why of risk management, not just on the what not to do, what to do, and that can help turn around a situation, ultimately transition it into the usage of best practices. But at the end of the day, we want everyone to have a safe and positive and healthy experience in Delta Sigma Pi. And as we continue to reiterate being proactive in risk management issues, setting a tone, building a rapport can help prevent larger issues from coming down the road. And I'm going to reiterate what Shanda just shared about the risk management session on Tuesday, September 14th. You know, Bobby Larson, she joined us, she's with Holmes Murphy, and she joined us at the leadership retreat in person 2 years ago. And, you know, those that attended, I mean, anytime you attend a Holmes Murphy event, I'll be honest, it's a very eye-opening experience. And having her there and being able to ask questions was wonderful. So having this opportunity with her in a webinar, I really encourage everyone to attend. Invite your district directors to attend as well. This is a great opportunity to be able to expand her knowledge to our greater audience and volunteer leaders. Oh, I'm gonna move us to our next topic. So as part of our policies as leaders, it is important to keep in mind our individual code of conduct that we are all bound by as, you know, part of our role in the fraternity. So this code of conduct does apply to all members of Delta Sigma Pi, but I put it in here because as it is within policy, it's good to keep in mind when thinking about the inner workings of the fraternity and each of our roles and how we all work together. And that we should all be following our code of conduct and all that we do and setting that example. And the same applies for our leadership code of conduct. So we all signed this when we either became a candidate for our position or were selected or transitioned into our position. A large part of the job that we have is relationship building and working closely with a variety of staff and volunteers. And sometimes our work requires us to work with those we might not agree with. And as a leader, it is our responsibility to work through those issues and find a way to work best with those that are around us. We are all on a team together here, and we are successful when we are all successful and work together. So following the individual and leadership codes of conduct and keeping those in mind in the work that we do will help us to continue to develop that. Before I move on, I just wanted to check and see if there were any questions on our codes of conduct. If anyone had any questions there, or you can drop it in the chat as I continue on too. All right. So the volunteer and staff partnership. Volunteer contributions are essential to the success of any association, and particularly for our organization. And as I mentioned before, so our organization is successful when we are all successful. The short webinars that staff built and received upon your election, I again encourage everyone to go back, take a review through these. Staff created these presentations so that you can review and learn, one, on your own time, but two, to help you be successful in your role. They're quick, they're full of information, and they'll give you those directions on where to find more answers, more details. They also give you an opportunity to meet the staff. We have a pretty fantastic staff who has a great tenure with us and brings a lot of fundamental knowledge. In addition, I do recommend utilizing the new toolkit that was recently developed by Emily Hudson. You know, we this year have been able to offer an abundant amount of training opportunities and resources for volunteers. I encourage everyone to tap into that to help you plan for your role. And I know that for some, it might be a refresher, but as you can tell from our topics today, the learning doesn't end. There's always more to learn. And as we continue to change, keeping up to date with our new processes, with our new policies and procedures. Now, as we talk about rules, our staff are responsible for carrying out our policies and practices and managing the day-to-day operations for the organization. As a volunteer, it's important for us to focus on our role and our job duties so that as we fulfill each of our roles, we can work with staff and facilitate that cohesive balance that best supports the entire organization and our members. We all bring expertise to the table, and the benefit of this cohesive balance is we're able to utilize the various experiences of our volunteers along with our experienced staff. We're also able to bring that continuity, that historical knowledge year after year that helps us build on the foundation of everything that we do and everywhere that we want to go. So you've heard a lot from several members of our staff today. We do have a wonderful staff who understand that we are serving in volunteer roles and that we have full-time jobs as well. And they'll work with us around those our jobs, schedule those calls, those meetings that are needed. But similarly, we as volunteers, it's important for us to remember that staff have full-time jobs as well, in addition to hosting events like this or the special meetings, special projects that might come along down the line. So as we are all working together, it's also a work to maintain that balance as we can try to get all of our job duties completed. It's also important to remember, I'm going to throw this in here, though we have so many staff members with us here today on a Sunday afternoon. Our staff is not 24 hours working, I hope most days. So please, I encourage all of our volunteers to keep that in mind when you are reaching out to staff, you need information, you are looking for resources, support, help. Obviously, emergency situations are different, but that our staff, they are full-time employees for us, where we might be working late at night in our volunteer role and hat. They might have other responsibilities at that time too. So as we talk about creating that cohesive balance between partnerships, our relationships, and then our operations and building on the foundation of our organization, we also want to talk about our strategic priorities and building on the foundation of what we've done the past 5 years and where we're going into the next 5 years. So for that, I am going to turn it over to Jeremy for a quick update.
Awesome. Thanks, Trish.
Do you want my slide or do you want me to
Yeah,
stop
please. Thank you. Perfect. Helpful for everybody to sort of see what we're talking about here. So hopefully you are all very aware of our new strategic priorities. It's very exciting to be at the beginning. It was very exciting to be at the end of the last set and to celebrate at Congress some of the just really awesome stats that we were able to pull together on progress and success over the last 5 years. And now sitting here at the beginning of a new set and a new 5-year priorities, just it's so incredibly motivating and exciting to think about what stats are we going to be sharing 5 years from now. But one of the things that we're going to talk about, some of the specific priorities and some of the how we ended up with where we're at, but I really wanted to point out for those who maybe haven't taken a moment to really sit and look at this incredible graphic yet. It's valuable and important to me because I think one of the things that we found with our last set of strategic priorities and really learned from the last set of strategic priorities is the goals themselves are incredibly important. And it's so valuable and helpful to have this direction to be going and these targets out there. But there's also so much that happens and so much we want to achieve from a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year, that really build into those things. And oftentimes we found ourselves saying, well, wait a minute, this is incredibly important, but where does it fit within the priorities? And as we looked at how we could set the strategic priorities for this next 5 years, one of the big things we looked at was, what are the things that are, for lack of a better term, bigger than our priorities, right? What is whatever the bigger priority of a priority is, and that's these baselines of the I like to call it a house that we're looking at here on this picture. Things like frankly just the purpose of Delta Sigma Pi, right? Our mission, our goal, our existence. Things like our governance structure, that is what allows us to operate and to succeed within these priorities. Things like the leadership foundation that is so critical to our success with the funds and the support. And frankly, even when we start talking about alumni engagement, the avenue for engagement and the avenues for giving and the avenues for education. And then of course, also DEI, diversity, is so important to our success in all of these different priorities. So we're going to talk over the next few minutes about some of the specific priorities, some of the specific goals, and really what I want to get into here today is how you as an RVP or as a PVP can work with your teams and where you fit in to this. But I think it's important to keep in the back of our heads with everything we're doing that while we may be talking about an alumni engagement goal or an education goal or a chapter growth goal, all of this is encompassed in these bigger, broader, equally, if not more important goals of keeping that focus on what are the structures, that governance structure that we need to have in place in order to be successful. Where are we doing with, or what are we doing with DEI that allows us to achieve in these other areas, or that frankly, if we're not keeping in mind DEI and we have those blinders on when we're going and looking at these other goals, where we end up maybe hitting a number and hitting a goal, but missing the bigger boat and missing the more important bigger picture. So I want to keep that in mind and ask everybody as we go through the next 5 years, certainly keep those in mind. But let's talk about some of the specific goals. So our first pillar here, that member education, it's very similar to what we had the last 5 years, but we've tweaked some of the goals. So we'll be talking over the next few months about the specific numbers or the specific wordings. I know the board of directors in a couple of weeks, I'm very excited for this, about staff and the board are going to be doing some brainstorming around how we can achieve these goals. So I don't want to focus too much on these specific numbers today, which is why we don't have a slide for each number, because that's not the purpose here. What I really want to talk to you all about is what areas are we focusing on? What directions are we focusing on so that you can start thinking about what you can do on that, again, chapter, regional, provincial level. So with education, we essentially have two different categories. We have, frankly, the number of people attending and participating in our educational programming. And then we have the training itself, and specifically looking again at the volunteers and the chapter officers and making sure that we're providing them the training that they need. So what does that mean for you all as local leaders? First of all, obviously driving attendance, right? Driving attendance, whether it be to lead events, whether it be to webinars, whether it be to your own regional programming, making sure that we're not just having those same people coming time in and time again, although we want them to keep coming as well, but broadening that ship, broadening the net of people that are coming to these events that you can achieve through your various interwebs and networks a whole lot better than, you know, anybody on the higher level is going to be able to do. So for example, one way that we're going to help you do that is in our new dashboarding that's going to be coming out soon. You'll be able to drill down and see not only how are we doing with this goal from a national level, but how are you doing on the regional level? When the chapter looks at it, they'll be able to see how are they doing on a chapter level, see some of their own attendance history, and see where that's going over time. So that's obviously an important piece here. When we start talking about the leadership training, CDL obviously for your DDs is a big thing for all of your regional and provincial volunteers. You know, driving that commitment from them is a huge way to help us reach this goal. But the other piece of all of this is, and it goes back to the attendance too, is working with staff and working with your hierarchy of volunteers to help make sure that we are achieving the right types of education. Trish was talking about staff and said very nice things about staff, which certainly appreciate. We are only as awesome and great as you allow us to be. So, you know, Shanda and the Professional Development Committee, you know, Shanda does some incredible educational programming throughout the year. And especially if you look at some of the stuff we've done over the last year and a half with different webinars and online trainings, and presumably that's going to keep going as we look forward. But the more you as the local leaders and really even your teams as the district directors and assistant district directors can be driving attendance towards those and working with Shanda to say, hey, here are the topics that our people are asking for. Here's the training that our people need. That's how we can really work together, as Trish was talking about, and build those bridges so that we are achieving our goals, not just by hitting the numbers, but by really getting to the meaning behind them. When we start talking about membership growth, you know, obviously there's two types of membership growth that we talk about. We talk about the number of chapters, but we also talk about the people in the chapters. Now, as we look at the chapter expansion, you know, I'll say similar things I was just saying, right? Dale can do some magical, incredible things when working with a school that has an opportunity for a colony and working with colonies and helping us get chapters. But you all, the people on the ground, are the ones that know where those right targets are oftentimes. And you can help direct those efforts and find those people and keep track of the different students who are going from school to school. We've talked a lot lately, anticipating a lot more transfers over the coming years. And that's going to become more and more a normalcy. Well, when a brother transfers to another school where there isn't a chapter, we as staff don't necessarily know where they're at, but you often do and can help make those connections and help create those new colonies and create those new chapters. So again, we can look at the big picture goal and we could look at, you know, how many chapters have we installed, but when we start talking to you on the local level, we want to get to a point where we're looking at specific target schools in your region and tracking those and tracking the progress of those and making sure that everybody's on the same page with where those targets are. Similarly, when we start talking about membership growth in terms of the number of dues paying members, right now we have the goal as a 10% overall growth of dues paying members over the next 5 years. Well, not every collegiate chapter, frankly, should grow by 10% over the next 5 years. There may be some collegiate chapters that are best served by going the opposite direction over the next 5 years. You on the regional level, you know these things, you can see these things, you can help, and we're going to make sure you have the tools to help track where that membership growth is going and where your region is progressing. But it really comes to you taking these bigger goals again and narrowing them and working with us, with Dale on the growth side, with Tyler Havens on the chapter service side, but working with your chapters to set those goals, right? So that when we look back 5 years from now, we're saying, wow, 10%, that was ridiculous that we thought the growth would be so small. The next pillar, when we start talking about member engagement, this is another area yet again, I know I'm a broken record here, but we can do an awful lot, sitting, whether it's the board, whether it's staff, we can do an awful lot of engagement and different activities. But Heather Troyer, as she keeps focusing even more and more time on the alumni engagement, is able to put on some great programs and some great messaging and some great systems. But at the end of the day, you all, again, know who some of those people are that can just become a little bit more engaged. They can trigger that next step, right? That they care, and maybe you see them in the Facebook group or things like that. But how are we then going and taking them from a just person who knows the organization exists to somebody who's doing just a little bit? We talk a lot to chapters about recruitment through taking a list of all of your possible prospective recruits, right? People that just and maybe would like to recruit into the chapter, and okay, what's the path to making them be just a little bit more likely to decide to pledge? Do the same thing within your teams when you're talking about alumni engagement. And again, we're going to be making sure that you have the numbers and the tracking that you need so that you can track not just how many people have you engaged within your region and hopefully motivate yourself to do more and more, but also for the sake of being able to track, okay, here's how many people I engaged last year. What does that look like this year, right? Am I engaging the same number of people, but they're totally different people, right? We want to make sure that we're retaining the engagement, not just getting them once and never see them again. This is also where we're going to be talking an awful lot over the next 5 years and probably forever and a day, but about those recent grads and how do we get them and keep them engaged as soon as and before they hit that graduation date. So when we're talking about this member engagement area, we're talking definitely about the overall engagement. We're talking about those people that haven't been as engaged over the past few years, but are coming back into the fold, and we can get re-engaged and re-tapped in. But we're also talking about those people who are collegiates and are becoming an alum or are actively engaged today, but maybe are having life changes, and how do we keep them engaged moving forward? The last pillar, always and forever, one of the hardest pillars when we start talking about how do these things affect on the various levels, but the organizational excellence. I like to think we're already excellent as an organization, but obviously there's plenty of room to keep growing and doing more and more and better and better. So we have 2 areas here that actually connect a little less than a lot of the other pillars. So one of our areas here is financials, and this is frankly something that doesn't necessarily play down into the various levels of operation as much. We're really talking about, when we look at the overall national budget, how do we make sure that our dependence on specifically dues and initiation fees is lessened through additional revenue sources. Now, when I say it's less engaged on yours, it doesn't mean it's not at all engaged, right? Things like driving attention towards the Leadership Foundation programs, that plays in here. Things like your chapter CLFs, right? The chapter champion programs. These are all things that you can help with on the local level that really help drive up to that bigger picture national goal. The other side is where you will probably be more involved, whether you want to be or not, no matter what, which is the chapter standards and helping make sure that our chapters are achieving the minimum standards that we set for them. Right now, we're talking about that in the terms of CMP, but the priorities as currently written are not specific, and that's intentional. And that's intentional because over the next 5 years, we may choose, and the board may choose, to take a different direction with CMP or something new or different. The board may choose to define higher standards for CMP or lower standards for CMP. The board may choose to look at some of the bylaws or policies requirements that currently exist, and they may shift. So the goal here is not just to make sure our chapters are achieving the goals, which absolutely is the goal. And please, please, please help us help you in making sure that we're working with the chapters to achieve those goals. But it's also to take a bigger step back and look at, what are these goals? What do we expect from a chapter in, frankly, 2026, right? Where do we want that minimum standard to be 5 years from now? And what do we need to do in order to make sure that our chapters are meeting that minimum standard? Because claiming we have a minimum standard is obviously different than having a minimum standard. So again, this is something that I imagine many of you and all of you will be very involved in at the various levels. I believe that's pretty much wraps up my time here, but that is our very exciting strategic priorities. Like I said, there'll be a lot more coming out in the coming weeks, frankly, as we start launching new dashboards and new metrics for you all to be watching and tracking, and as the various audiences, presumably at some point, including you all, start doing different brainstorming activities and feedback, and we really decide and set some some directions on what the specific things we're going to be looking to do over the next 5 years are. So I don't know if I'm going back to Trish here or to Shanda or what, but I am done.
Thanks, Jeremy. Actually, I do have a job that got covered by my screen here. I have the job of turning us over to Bricken for our next section, how to find, train, and recognize volunteers, DDs, and others. Bricken, we're just a slight bit ahead of schedule, but we're turning over to you if you're all set.
Perfect. Thanks, Trisha. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, I just have to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Should say how to find, train, and recognize volunteer leaders.
We got it. I can see it.
All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So thank you, Shanda, Trisha, and all for letting me present on this topic. It's something that's definitely near and dear to my heart. So as we dive in then, we're all familiar with different volunteers in our organization and that they are vital to the success and longevity of our organization. Everyone probably knows this, but I just laid it out. We have volunteers at all different levels within Delta Sigma Pi. We have folks at the national level, so our national board, which includes our grand president, provincial vice presidents, vice president of finance, and then our collegiate of the years. And then our national chairs are also on the national level for the awards, alumni, professional development, community service, and I think there's even a couple others. So that's kind of the top tier of our organization. Then a step down, we've got the provincial level. So we have many PVPs on this call. There's also provincial chairs. So I know some folks on the call have been previous chair members or maybe new ones. So these fall into the awards and scholarships category, the alumni, professional chair, and then professional development. A step below that, we have the regional level. So many regional vice presidents are on this call. I was a former RVP. It's an amazing role. Obviously, you get to work with district directors who are kind of also at that regional level and work with the specific chapters. Newer within the last year or so is assistant district directors. And then I put receiver on there because that's something that I've learned of recently, but that's also another position. There may be others too. And then as you drill down even further at the local level, so within any given city, there could be alumni chapters and folks hold positions there, as well as the individual chapters themselves at the different colleges. There are an array of positions. So that's just to kind of give a expansive picture of all the different groups of people that help. I know this came up earlier in the training, different breakout sessions, but there are also volunteers who aren't within specific roles, who just help at, say, a panel for, chapters organizing, or who are on different committees or help in different ways, who volunteer with our leadership fund and so forth. So really, there's people who help make this organization run at every level, every different level of experience and so forth. So thank you all for that. So the next thing to talk about is kind of how to identify volunteer leaders. We've all gotten involved for one reason or another, and we love the organization. And so we want to try to attract others to help, again, with the longevity of DSP and to continue to grow future leaders and be successful. So I just wrote out some areas where you can find different volunteer leaders. So whether it's at alumni chapter meetings, you could culminate a recent list of graduates from any given college or area. For instance, as an RVP, if you're trying to find DDs, you can reach out to central office. They are immensely helpful. They can grab a list of recent collegiate graduates from a certain area and give that to you, and then you can comb through that. Alumni radius report, kind of similar to that, or word of mouth. So if you put up vibes and say, I'm looking for someone who fits this criteria, just to a group of brothers or alumni, they may know people who may not have been involved for a while or who are looking to get back involved. I found a few DDs that way, which has been helpful, just to kind of put out your feelers. A lot of times existing volunteer leaders will have recommendations that kind of ties into the word of mouth. And then sometimes there are previous district directors or RVPs and so forth who want to re-engage either in the same position or a position they held previously, or looking to expand and hold a new position. So really there's lots of opportunity and folks anywhere you look. So then I also wrote out a few good qualities for a volunteer leader. Obviously there are more, but in looking for someone to engage in DSP and to help and support, you want someone who is passionate, someone who can dedicate not only time, possibly travel, but also just dedicate time, talent, treasure, those sorts of things. I think it's helpful to have someone who's organized, just so that especially with being remote and so forth, blocking off the time, organizing calendars, organizing communications and so forth. It could be a lot of different skills just to either maintain a specific position or just an event or something that you're participating and helping with. So the next slide, then, I'm going to talk a little bit about appointing district directors. So this is something that will relate to RVPs on the call. So as of right now, most of you may have already identified DDs since the school year has started. I think probably at most chapters. But when I was an RVP, and I lovingly borrowed this from Nicole Orlando. So as you're appointing district directors, it helps to kind of set your expectations. This is true even in the working world when you have a job description. For example, you're essentially hiring this district director to fill a role and to do a specific job. And so for me, I think it's helpful to map out with your district director over the course of the year what your expectations are. And this could be true for other volunteer roles too, but setting those expectations. So for district directors, specifically within a region, attending one chapter event per month is kind of a good minimum standard. So whether that's in person or remote, with COVID, but just making sure that they're really keeping their pulse on the state of the chapter. In addition to that, though, the DD should be contacting the chapter. It might primarily be the president, at least once a week, and the DD should figure out what's the best form of communication, whether that's texting, calling, doing a Zoom call, email, so forth. We have so many different methods now that I think it's easier probably to keep in touch with people. The next one is, this is something that I recommend too for RVPs, is having a monthly touch point. And so having all your DDs on the call, it kind of serves as a status update so that they can vocalize what's going on with the chapters. Now, as an RVP, hopefully you already know what's going on, but it helps, in my opinion, for them to kind of vocalize with each other and to kind of build that bond. And I've seen a lot of times where DDs will build off of each other. So if one has questions or is struggling in an area, someone else will chime in and they kind of help each other, which is really great because we have a mix of experiences and knowledge and so forth. And with Zoom now, everyone's got cameras, so it's really nice to see people no matter the distance. Depending on how big your region is, that could be really helpful. Another thing for DDs to do is do at least the first tier of the CDL. You don't have to require this, I think, for DDs, but it is a really good way to just learn more about the organization and to expand your knowledge and become a better DD, in my opinion. And then lastly, attending at least one lead event, so either the fall or spring. And that's for a couple of reasons. It's to, again, stay relevant with knowledge about the fraternity, but also to engage your students virtually or in person. Plus, it's fun to see other alumni and participate in events. I think travel is partly one of the things most of us as volunteers love about this organization. So this next one is kind of a no-brainer. With DDs, ensure that they can commit the time. It varies kind of on the state of the chapter and how much help they need or what questions they have and so forth. But just kind of, preface that with the DD. As an RVP, hopefully, the state of the chapter and what kind of help they might need or, where they're headed and so forth. And then physically appointing them in the hub. There's a way to log in, add their name, get their exact address. I found that can be tricky. You have to actually put in the city and so forth so that they pop up in the system. And then that expires, I think, in July of every year. So a lot of times DDs will want to be the full 2 years for the biennium, which is fantastic. Sometimes things will come up and people want to step down for various reasons. So the next group of volunteers I wanted to talk about appointing were national committee members. So all committee chairs are appointed by the grand president and should demonstrate understanding of current fraternity programs and operations as required by the board of directors. So I just mapped out in bullets here the different committees. So nominations, organizational development, finance, alumni development, community service, professional development, and then lastly, scholastic development and awards committee. And so with each of these committees, we've got a chair who leads the group, and then committee members that fall within each one and help support the committee itself and their deliverables and goals and so forth. So this next slide then is about how to develop your volunteer leaders, which is really one of the fun parts about getting to be a volunteer leader, is taking either existing volunteers or new volunteers, maybe fresh graduates and so forth, and teaching them more about DSP, and then really helping them to expand on their skills, whether that's improving communication, improving organization, kind of igniting that fire that makes them passionate and showing them through what you've learned and what you've experienced. And so there's a number of ways to really build up volunteer leaders, regardless of their experience in DSP, age, so forth. And one of those is to organize some sort of annual retreat with your DDs or your committees. Now, retreat doesn't mean necessarily overnight. I mean like a half day or maybe a full day, smaller group conference type thing where you get together and have kind of like with a lead where you map out an agenda and say, for this hour, we're going to talk about this topic. And then we're going to do some team bonding experience. And then we'll dive into, how to navigate the hub and tips and tricks. And really just put together an agenda that would be helpful to your team, the volunteer leaders, to help give them the tools that will let them be supportive, let them be successful in what they're trying to achieve for the year. As an RVP, I had done this 2 different falls with my DD group. The first time was in person, just before COVID, and then the second one we did virtually. And it was fun to meet up in person. We got sandwiches. We got a private room and had a projector, and I let my DDs do a couple of the sessions just so that they had a chance to present to their peers and again to learn from each other. And it was fun. It was a good experience. So I'd highly recommend doing that. The next one is So inviting volunteer leaders to speak at different conferences. So there could be an alumni, for instance, who's not necessarily involved with a given committee or DD or so forth, but they still want to be involved. And so they could maybe present at a lead session. I think I've seen alumni do like how to buy a house or different like kind of life skills that tie into business, which are really cool and different to see. You can also host those monthly team calls with everyone, as I mentioned before. So you can task one person each meeting to take notes. I know that this last year and a half, 2 years, our provincial team would do that. We'd circulate through the different RVPs on who would take notes, and then we'd share those out, which was kind of nice. It shares the responsibility and, you know, gives everyone a chance to participate. This next one, coordinate quarterly one-on-one sessions with team members. So this is something that I didn't have a chance to do, but I think after like thinking back, lessons learned from being an RVP, I think it'd be helpful if, you know, just once a quarter you sat down with each of your DDs, or once or twice a year, depending on how big your region is. And this applies to committees too. And really just have like that one-on-one touch point, kind of get to know them, see what they're doing, see if there's anything that you can do as the leader of that group to help them. And that's just a really nice way to also show thanks and to give them the attention that they need. Next one is creating learning opportunities during potentially difficult chapter situations. So I know we'd already talked about risk management and things like that. There will be encounters that people have with chapters that are difficult, and either you've not gone through something like that before, and might not know how to deal with that. But as leaders working with people on your team, it's a really good learning opportunity on how to approach it next time. I can think of a couple of situations when I was RVP, and it was something I'd never encountered. So honestly, like reaching out to leadership above at the provincial level and trying to get that guidance, and then learning through that experience is really good. Just, you know, as you go through your fraternal career and things happen sometimes. And the last one would be to encourage team members to pursue additional learning. CDL is a great one. So I already mentioned that, tier 1 or, you know, and or tier 2, just to really strengthen their fraternity knowledge and keep it current too, because I think they're always adding new materials to the CDL. All right, and then lastly here, the other fun part of being a volunteer leader, working with other volunteer leaders, is getting to recognize people. We all take time out of our busy schedules and do this because we're passionate and we love it. And so as a volunteer leader in charge of a group, you want to make sure that you shower them with praise and make sure that they feel included and that they feel appreciated. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. It's really whatever your flavor is. You can do shout outs at your monthly meetings, or kind of like at a job, give them praise or positive criticism at a one-on-one. There are different awards for things that you can nominate people for. Advisor of the year, district director of the year, depending on your relationship with someone and how well they're doing. So that's always fun. That's like a huge reflection of your appreciation, saying, yeah, you did such a great job. I nominated you for this because you just need to know how great you are. So that always makes someone feel the warm fuzzies. You can always text, call, or email someone just at any given moment if they do something exceptional, and just make sure that they know that. Or just say thank you for helping in this difficult situation. I really appreciate having you on the team. I had one DD this last year who I can't imagine not having her for this chapter specifically, and it was an amazing. She just made the world of difference, and she also had such a great attitude and personality to work with. So I was just so fortunate, and she wanted to come back too this next year. So, yeah, and so you can consider sending handwritten notes too. That's always a nice touch. I've gotten some of those in the past, and that always makes someone smile. Or you can give them like a $5-10 gift card to go get a cup of coffee on you. And that's always kind of sweet. And just remember that they are part of your team and that you're all working to help the fraternity overall. So really anything you can do to kind of say thank you and show that appreciation is good. And then at the end here, I just put a few resources. So a couple of fraternity-wide programs, and then for new DDs, it is helpful, in my opinion, to browse through the district director manual, just to kind of familiarize yourself with stuff. And also to use it as a go-to if you have questions before going to, say, your RVP or higher up. I think Shanda said good leaders know when to ask questions. I totally agree with that. So as a district director or committee team member, feel free to ask people on your team or your volunteer leaders, different levels of the fraternity, different things. So, all right, I will turn it back over to Shanda then. Unless there's any questions, I apologize.
Any questions? Bricken has a lot of great experience and information, and there's certainly others on here also that could interject any ideas or things that they may have done to recognize and appoint and find various leaders. Anybody? All right. Well, Bricken, you did a fantastic job. Thank you. You gave everyone some great information. Really appreciate it. At this point, let's just move into some general Q&A. We have a little extra time before we're going to do some networking. But I know there's got to be some questions. There's been a lot of information shared, but there's also been a lot of information not shared that you may have questions about. So here is that opportunity to ask. We've got various staff members of the fraternity and foundation available. We've got leaders of all ilks, many experience, some new. So what do you have for us? And Jillian's going to hop in here as well and help facilitate this with us. Well, while you're thinking of your question, and I'm sure you're feverishly typing it for us right now, I will give you a couple of bits of info to digest, and then we'll resume questions. So we've already mentioned the risk management session Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Do register and try to attend that. For the provinces, I made an announcement right after the break: Southern, North Central, Western, and then additionally, Corey, Tricia, and Brennan, I believe, are going to do some recording this afternoon on some needs for this week. You should have gotten the email with instructions and a time to go over to that new Zoom. At the point that happens, just leave the networking for a few minutes, head over to the new Zoom that you were assigned. And then when you're done, come on back and keep networking with the group would be great. And then, so here's something new that will affect some of you. Some of you have already done it, so you'll be happy. We have partnered up with Plaid, and they are the organization that built our President's Academy. They also host our LMS, developed our learning modules for pledges, for chapter officers, and CDL. We worked with them to, make all of that virtual and a much better platform for folks. We have used them for the last few years with President's Academy and other, and we have done the Berkman assessment with them, which is a leadership styles assessment. We are partnering with them again to do that for this next President's Academy, but we're also doing it for Leadership Now so that we can figure out how best to have leaders and staff all working together within your own provincial teams, within the national team, with all the teams. So as soon as this meeting is done, I'm going to be sending an email to all of you with the details and the instructions on how to take the assessment. Essentially, you'll go to the LMS, and if you have not taken it before, you will have a link to take it now. If you did take it previously, you don't need to take it again. If you wish to, you just need to let me know and I will get a special link sent to you. But all these details are in the email. We will be doing some review of this at the fraternity board meeting coming up in a couple of weeks with Plaid. And we want the PVPs to have their RVP results to review and discuss. So all of this will be due on Monday, the 20th. So a week from tomorrow by noon. And it will take about 40 minutes is usually what it takes. And there's no right or wrong answers. There's no studying. There's no prep you can do. You just need to log in, sit down and take it. So that information will come out after this, but just wanted to give you all a heads up. Looks like we have some emails that have come in or some texts here. Jillian, are you watching what's coming?
Yeah, I'm watching the Q&A, and there's one question that came in that I think would be helpful for this group from Jen. And it states that there was an email sent to alumni leaders about an October 5th date for a webinar for risk management, and that there's 2 webinar dates on the event calendar. One this week on September 14th and one October 5th. And Heather answered that there are 2 specific different webinars, right? So we need everyone to attend on the 14th. Is that correct, Shanda?
Yeah, 14th is more targeted to the national leadership and talking about your roles in leadership since you're not a specific collegiate chapter member. The October 5th event is for anyone and everyone. We'd love to see a lot of our collegiates and alumni chapters attend that. You are also welcome to attend that, but the messaging will be a bit different. And I would certainly anticipate the Q&A and discussion to take a little bit different tone just because of audiences.
Great. Thanks for the clarification too. And thanks for Heather's rapid fire answering on the chat too.
Thank you. Yes.
What other questions? Yeah. What other questions do you guys have? I'll ask a question. Was there anything that you guys heard today or learned or relearned that was good to know or surprising, or anything you're really going to take action on as a result of this session? It was a lot of content. We realize that.
This is typically a 3-day event. So it's, yes, a lot of manipulation to get it into the 4-hour time frame. So we know we threw a lot at you quick. Great. Glad to hear the DE&I with Katie was a helpful session. That's great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, okay. So here's what we're going to do. I've had a couple of requests for please, we need a quick break before we go into networking. So since we have a couple of minutes to do that, why don't we just take a quick 5-minute break and we'll start the networking early. No reason we shouldn't end this earlier so everyone gets a little more of their afternoon or evening back. So let's take a 5-minute break, 4:41 right now Eastern time, come back about 4:46 Eastern. We will go ahead and jump into networking led by Jillian and Emily. We do hope everyone can attend. If you can't, we certainly understand, but it'll just be a time to get to know each other better. So take a break and come back and we'll see you in a few minutes.